right, well, let's call our meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. The first item on the official agenda is to review and approve minutes from February 16th, 2022. Is there anyone who read the minutes and had anything they wanted to raise as an issue, anything they wanted to ask to be amended?
The only thing I request, it happens all the time, so don't worry about it, but my name is, it's K-L-E-Y.
Well, I'm sorry,
Sometimes,
John. I
well,
thought I had it on there right.
You
I've
did
got
as
it
far
in
as the
the,
attendees, but hey, it happens all the time. I get called worse
Yeah.
than that, believe me.
Okay,
But just, just for posterity's sake, 100 years from now, when they read the notes, they can get it right.
so wait a minute. So it's two L's, right? K-E-L-L-E-Y. So
Correct,
it's
yeah.
in the the members present, it's correct
Right.
there, but that
Yeah.
at some other places, it's not. So I see it in a couple of places correct. Is there a specific place where it's not correct so I can fix it?
Yep, I gotta blame my grandfather for that. He put it in there for some reason.
Okay. Well, I'll go through and see if I can find where it is.
All right.
Okay. The only thing that was in question, Meg, was I wasn't able to attach the letter from the Chamber of Commerce. So but I was able to copy and attach the other two. So I just said, forget it to all three, and said that the copies would be on file with the CPAC administrator. I don't know if you want me to change that and add it so that it's, I don't know. How do you want me to handle that?
Because it was a PDF.
Well, one was in the body of a I don't know, the way it was sent, I wasn't able to copy it.
Okay.
So what do you want me to do? Just leave it like that so that Amy would have to be the.
We did read it into the record, so I think we do have to include it. So
Okay.
Let me just work with you to figure out how to attach it.
All right, so for the copy that I send to Amy for as the final copy, you want me to include the three somehow?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
so.
All right.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with all three letters that were read into the record included.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And thank you as always for the minutes, Mary. You do a wonderful job.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna talk really briefly about just some updates on some current and past projects. So I wanted to share that we put an extension request for a number of projects for the City Council for Mayor Field, War Memorial, the VOC Chestnut Street Project, Pulaski Park, Armor and Company, and Wayfinders. It was moved to Finance as a subcommittee, was heard at Finance on February 28th and was passed with recommendation. It will go to the March 15th City Council meeting, and I have no reason not to believe it will be, accepted. It was, put forward from Finance with full recommendation. So that's a good thing. And then on top of that, we have a couple other updates. So we're still waiting on hearing from Mass Historic on the preservation restriction from the Chestnut Street project. We submitted that through our city solicitor, just waiting for feedback and comment from them to see if they're approving it or if any edits have to be made. Wayfinders, still waiting on an award being announced. The state has not announced any awards for the round that they were in. We're still waiting. We've reached out to them a few times, and each time they're pretty apologetic and saying that we wish we had heard the announcements too, but it's not that we haven't gotten it, it's just that no announcements have been made. So we're still waiting on that. Jackson Street, an affordable housing restriction was drafted by the city solicitor. We're just waiting for it to be filed on completion. The big one is probably, Pulaski Park, we were actually waiting for a bid. That's actually why we had to ask for an extension. This was for the study for the wall repair. And they had a really hard time getting anyone to bite on it, but they finally did. And the good news is that the bid that came in way under. So we had allocated up to 40,000 and it came back at 13,500. So that's awesome. That always makes me happy when things come in less than we thought they would.
Yeah.
When does that happen? Never. And the other piece that I wanted to bring up is the Armor and Company piece. So Armor and Co. sent us an email that they're going to officially withdraw their application. And that funding will be unencumbered and move back into the general fund. They had met with the Historic Commission, sort of informally had some conversations with members of the Historic Commission, and had really been really asking for an acceptance of some major revisions to the plan that just didn't align with historic preservation funding, right? I think it's a learning curve for us as a committee, as well as for our applicants who are getting to know us. And like Girls Inc. is here tonight, right? We're still trying to figure out what does this mean to have a preservation restriction. And in their case, they had submitted a preservation restriction that we were about to send to Mass Historic. And then they said, actually, I think we need to change the following things. And we want to change this doorway and this window and this here and this there. And then it no longer is historic preservation. It's something else. And when it gets to that point and the Historic Commission felt like it would not be approved by Mass Historic, they decided they would just withdraw their application. So I'm kind of sad about it because I really liked that project, like a lot. And I sent them an email from the committee just saying, despite that, like we fully support your project and we very much hope this moves forward. And when it becomes a restaurant, I will be your first patron. I will be there on your opening night eating your food. Michael, your hand was up.
Oh, yeah, Madam Chairman, what was the amount of the award to the Armor and Company? Do you know that approximately?
90,000.
So we have, that being said, we have currently, if I got this right, in our pocketbooks, 200.
I see what you're doing, Mike. I see what you're doing. You're doing
Well,
some
we
math.
Yeah, we have $286,991 in our pocketbooks, and now we have an additional $90,000. Would that be correct?
Well, I have a whole section of the meeting just on the budget because I think that there is some funky stuff we can talk about for how much we have and how much we don't.
Okay.
No problem. There's funding that we know we have, and then there's the question, for example, does there have to be like a legal document? Does it have to be beyond an email, right? Does someone in the city solicitor's office have to have a document where they sign off that they have withdrawn officially before that funding is unencumbered, right? So there's just different questions that we have that we're trying to figure out.
Okay.
Yes, it's possible, right? But we're still trying to assess that out. And we'll talk more about budget for sure before we talk about our next round of projects and who we can and can't fund. Okay. In terms of an update on current projects, so
actually before you go on, can I just ask a couple of questions on the Pulaski wall repair? That was not for the repair, but for a plan to repair. Is that correct? Okay. All right.
Yeah, and it becomes the basis of any bid that the city will now put out.
All right. And the other question I have is, you said that the 5 extensions you requested, finance passed them with recommendations. Does that mean that they're suggesting we make some changes to the plan of action?
No, they're recommending them to city council. They're saying,
oh, okay.
We think you should vote for these.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So current projects. So we sent the projects last month that we had voted on to city council. And thank you, Amy, for doing a really nice write-up that I think was just the right amount of information to help them understand the projects. And I was there at the finance meeting because they were tabled other than GLOUTAC to the subcommittee for finance. GLOUTAC was passed on the floor. So that's $47,000 for the trail work there at, GLUTAC. I keep mispronouncing that, my apologies. And that will be with a partnership with an organization that hires and trains Holyoke youth to do the work, which is really exciting. That was passed on the floor, largely because Yoni was there, could speak to the project, and could talk about how important the deadlines were to making it happen this summer. So they're working feverishly to now make it happen this summer. The others were moved to finance. I did attend the finance subcommittee meeting on March 7th. I did present the projects, and they were recommended for funding to the whole city council. So they'll go to the city council on March 15th as well. So certainly at the next meeting, I'll be able to tell you, and I'm almost certain it will be good news. The last piece I had for credit projects was on the MIFA Murals project. So they were hoping that Jeff Green, who is the restorer from Evergreen, who was going to do the work, was going to be able to meet them this month. He ended up having to postpone until the end of this month. And so we won't hear from that applicant or that grant recipient until next month for their update on the project. One piece that we do know is that kind of coming from the building commissioner and the board of health director, that there are some outstanding pieces on the property that they're going to have to resolve before they are going to have access to CPC funding. So I'll read this out to you. So the contract from CPC should require compliance with section 18-35. We discussed MIFA's non-compliance with the city's blighted and vacant building ordinance. Letter from building commissioner and the board of health director. They owe $18,000, but also need to submit a functional rehab plan and a reasonable improvements to the building exterior instead of just a flat payment. So they have some concerns about graffiti outside the building. They have some concerns about the stability of the roof. And so I think there's some other pieces happening in the city too, just making sure that as we're, creating a contract where we're giving them funding, there may be some prerequisites for the funding that the city requires to be in that contract. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Yeah,
Mary?
and yes, and the 18,000 that they owe, is that taxes or is that in regards to stating that the building is a blighted building? What is the 18,000?
So I don't quite understand. It's something that I've been getting into the details of a little bit more just to understand what has to actually go in the contract. But it's something that the city, put in place as an incentive or disincentive, as it were, to owning a building but not maintaining it. And so if you sort of being dinged every year, it sort of accrues over time as you haven't either paid it or fixed the problem. So I did get the sense that it wasn't just like we want your money. It was this is us trying to push on getting this building to be brought up to where we want it to be maintained. And we would accept that. Or maybe that's more of a negotiation, I'm not exactly sure. But I did get the sense they were mostly just trying to get the building to a place where there's a rehab plan submitted, and they're doing that work to resolve some of the outstanding issues before we give them funding, or as a condition of our funding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Meg,
Yep.
question. Have they been in communication with one another and working to try to mitigate the issue, or is it something that they're just ignoring them on it, and they're coming to us because they're able to get funding through this way? So they're saying they've been ignoring us, or we've been working with them, because those are two different things, I feel like.
So my sense, they said they had been sending letters, but the letters have been going unanswered.
Okay. Yeah. So
But again, I won't pretend to know all the details,
of course,
right? And all the mechanisms and relationships here at play. This is just the information I'm getting from the city that I'm trying to share, just so that and when this contract gets drafted, the contract subcommittee will have to then take whatever language the city solicitor provides and include it in the contract. So just to keep you updated with the communication that we were getting. Okay, so I want to quickly go over the budget, and then we're going to hop into hearing from some of our FY22 applicants. Okay, so I spoke with Andrew today because I wanted to just reaffirm that the numbers that I had were correct. So hold on, I'm gonna go back one slide. Whoop. There we go. Okay, so this was what I showed you last time. So effectively, after taking the tax levy and the state match, and then adding the excess from last year, some of which was from some projects that had kind of come back into the general fund, some of which was an excessive state match that we had not used last year that kind of came in after we had named our budget. And then subtract from that number 5%, which is the admin budget, 18,000 set aside for small grants, and then 10% encumbered to housing, since we do not have any housing projects and must spend 10% or set that money aside for specifically in the housing category for a coming year. So in total, we had $837,901.05. So what funding remains? So we started with that number for what is totally available right now, and then you subtract from it 75,000 for Lady Liberty, 30,000 for Anniversary Hill, Scotts Tower Phase 2, 47,000 for Lutak Trails, 125,000 for Wisteria Hearst painting, and $80,000 for the stained glass windows. And you have right now 357,000 that was recommended, and you have 480,901.05 remaining.
Yeah.
Now, to Michael's point earlier, there is also some unexpended funding that we have. But it's sort of, yes, we could spend down to the last dime, but I didn't have time with Andrew to go over all of those numbers. So it may be that after I meet with him this month with Amy and Tanya, that next month we come back and say, actually, we have now, $130,000 more, right, that we could consider expending this year or holding on to for next year. And that actually comes a little bit of nickel and diming, because there are some projects like Pulaski that came in under, right? And so when you add those up, right, like you have a little bit more money than you thought you had. And we have the Armor and Company project coming back into the general coffers as well. So those pieces, right, we may end up having a little bit more money than the 480 and 901, but we, I can't tell you exactly what that dollar amount is, and I don't want us to depend on it tonight until I have those numbers. Okay, any questions about this? Yes, Michael.
Madam Chairman, didn't we, I'm going on my memory now, didn't we give a lot, about $10,000 to Wisteria Hearst to fix the bricks for the maintenance? Didn't we vote on that at our last meeting, or no?
It was $125,000. And the part of it that they have assigned to CPC funding is painting. The part they're hoping will be matching with Mass Historic is the brick and the chimney work.
Okay, for some reason, I thought it was about $10,000, and I could be wrong. I mean, I'm just going on memory. I thought we had voted to allot them $10,000 to do the chimney and the various other maintenance problems they had there, but I'm going on memory, so maybe we didn't do it.
The only part that we put forward to the city council, the technical term is the museum exterior repainting and repairs. But of course, the piece for that is that they know how much the painting will likely cost, and if they have more out of the 125 to do other repair, they will. But they're planning on at least doing the painting, even if it isn't matched with Mass Historic funding.
Okay.
Because it's part of a much bigger project. Any other questions? Okay. Well, folks want to write down that number. Because the reality is we start getting out into talking about the rest of our projects, and we'll hear from a few tonight. There are no more like easy choices to make, because at this point, it's not just taking one project at a time. It's now like weighing them against each other, right? We fund one, we don't fund another. So then it becomes more of a holistic conversation of like, let's throw out what are our top 3 or 4 remaining that we really want to consider, and let's consider them against each other, because at this point, funding one means not funding another, right? Or funding 2 means funding not the other 2. One piece that I want to start with is an update from the contract subcommittee on the terms and conditions presented to you all, and then us voting on the approval of those terms. So thank you to John and Michael for meeting so that we could look at the contract terms. And Amy made some really good suggestions that I think are really going to simplify it, so that we're going to have more sort of boilerplate terms for most applicants. Let me show that to you really quick. All right. Okay. So what we effectively are thinking about doing is almost like a standard 36 months to complete the project once the contract is executed, with an official report due within 30 days of project completion, including written and visual project documentation. And then for extensions, the recipient may request, and the Holyoke CPC may, in its sole discretion, approve an extension to a specific date the committee considers appropriate for good cause shown. Funds not utilized on the project will be returned to the Community Preservation Fund Reserve and will be made available for future appropriation to other recipients. Okay. So it's a big shift, right? Away from sort of nickel and diming and naming really clear deadlines, and also giving us the ability to give extensions, as compared to giving the city council the power to do that. I did talk to the finance committee about this, and the finance committee felt positive about it. They sort of said, you've come back a lot for different extensions. And so, yeah, like we trust you to make good decisions, because we understand that we also don't want to encumber funding forever when we know we have good projects that we can then expend the funding on, right? If a project really isn't going to move forward in any kind of appropriate timeline. So that's, a kind of a template for what we're thinking we will do for pretty much every contract moving forward. Other than they must cover the cost for and agree to display a permanent approved CPA sign. While work is in progress, the applicant must display a temporary sign provided by us. And then Amy outlined the information that she needs for how, vendor payments work and invoicing works, which is standard. That's what she's been following all along. So then for the other ones, right, all of them are pretty much exactly the same, except for in Glutak, because we acquired the land, there's already a CPA sign there. So we don't have to require a new sign. Although it does say that we're asking for an acknowledgement, specifically naming the scope of work for this project be included in the kiosk that they're building. Other than that, it's the exact same as the first project. And then for Wisteria Hearst painting, very similar. The only difference is that we put CPC funds are a 1-to-1 match up to $125,000. If, however, Wisteria Hearst is unable to complete that 1-to-1 match with Mass Historic, the CPC will still make $125,000 available for a modified project. And that's it. None of these projects require PR or CR because they either already have it or don't need it because they're a city project. So that simplifies things. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, any questions? Amy, I know you had said that you weren't so sure about the Glutak kiosk. It was something that Yoni had suggested, so I'm guessing it's something he had already included.
Good.
Amy had messaged me to say, I know the kiosk is already done, so I don't know if we can require it now. It came from Yoni. Okay, any other questions or suggestions before we make a motion to approve those terms? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the terms?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or debate? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. And thank you, gentlemen, for doing this work. It's good because it moves it out of this committee to have to create all of it from scratch. Okay. All right. So let's hear from Girls Inc. first. And then is there anyone else here to talk to us formally? I also have a letter to read into the record from New England Farm Workers. Okay, so let's start. Suzanne Parker, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and jump in.
Sorry, Carrie Parsons is here from Miracle League.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, perfect. So let's hear from Girls Inc. first and then Carrie Parsons.
Great. Hi, I'm Suzanne Parker, Executive Director for Girls Inc. of the Valley. Thank you so much for allowing us to come back and provide some additional information. I believe that with coming under the historic preservation category, that we needed to make sure there was some confidence that we would meet the standards that would be required for that. So I have here Elan Tierney, who's architect at Murals Architects and the principal there, who helped draft the letter to provide that additional information. And I don't know, was that letter able to be sent out ahead of time, or will we can follow up and send it out? Okay. So I do have it here. I can share my screen and kind of walk through it as well, but I really want to give you an opportunity to ask questions of, so if we can get some, let me just see it here. Let me just share. Oops. Okay. There we go. So I think it's really around meeting those standards for rehabilitation, and again, having a comfort around that, or at least some confidence that it won't get tied up in a back and forth as to whether it's going to meet those standards. And so the beginning of the letter, Elan does a really great job talking about the project, the scope of the project, what's included overall, and then really getting into, again, how, again, the thoughts around the standards and how we meet them. And so I don't know if it makes sense to go in specific details around these. Again, I know the letter has been sent out. I know one of the issues or questions came up about, the front of the building and changes. I think point 4 talks about, that properties do change over time. Changes actually have historic significance in their own right, and that they're going to be retained and preserved. And so just really talking about that, like this building has been there for 138 years, and certainly there have been some changes throughout that have been made. So I think I'm going to stop sharing the letter. But open it really up for questions. Have people had a chance to review the letter, or is it helpful to actually go through it a little bit more carefully?
I did not receive the letter.
It was just sent out, so probably people didn't get a chance to look at it closely.
Okay. I see Michael has a question. I don't know what protocol, best protocol.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, through the chair, Suzanne, our big Marco and I think most of us were concerned about the objections that the Mass Historical Society may have by not restoring the building as it was 138 years ago. There's a certain tension there that we felt that needed to be clarified, but I'm under the presumption that with your architect and that letter, that the Mass Historical Society, did they approve of your proposed changes and restoration methodology? Would that be correct?
Well, if I can jump in, maybe. Hi, everyone. My name is Elan Tierney. I'm president at Murals Architects in Amherst. As an architect, I absolutely love old buildings, and we get to work on a lot of historic ones. We have had experience working with Mass Historic on other historic buildings that are actually, in the National and State Register. This building is not. And so we haven't gone to Mass Historic for any kind of review process because it's not a registered building. But in my experience working on registered historic buildings, and how they outline the guidelines, they talk about buildings changing over time, and that change over time has its own historic significance. And I realize you all didn't get a chance to read the letter, but this building in particular is interesting because it was added onto over time. It changed how it was used over time. I believe the original photographs that you might have seen showed a big archway and sort of a hayloft, which probably is where the carriages went in and out for the construction company. So restoring it back to that time period functionally would not work for Girls Inc. It would also be very, very expensive. The changes that have been made have created a layer of history to the building. You can see how it has changed over time, and you can see the different time periods that it has changed. And that in itself is sort of a history of the building, and it walks you through how construction has changed over time. So maybe for me, I might appreciate that more, just sort of being able to see that. But as someone who maybe appreciates history within Holyoke, you can also imagine how this building has changed over time and how we've progressed in terms of our technology and building methods. And so I think that has value itself. So I guess to answer your question, Mass Historic has not reviewed this. I feel that there's a case that can be made that they would approve the work that's being done. We're not changing anything and taking anything away from what it is currently. We're restoring the masonry to the best of our ability to match the texture and colors that are there. But to take it back to its original 1860s building would not work for Girls Inc. And in some ways it's erasing the history of the building as it is now.
So, Madam Chairman, another question for Suzanne and then Elion. By definition, do you need, in order for you to proceed with this work, do you need the approval of the Mass Historical Society? Okay.
Problem is that a preservation restriction is approved by Mass Historic before being held by the Historic Commission. So we just have to make sure that if we move forward with this applicant, that we have in good faith have confidence that Mass Historic will approve it, so that we can expend the funding. Since we won't be able to
is this just to clarify myself, is this a state law requirement or is this a requirement of our committee? I just want to be clear. Like all of us, I don't want to invest this kind of money and all of a sudden the Mass Historical Society say, wait a minute, you didn't get our approval and we're not allowing you to do it. So I just want that clarified. Is it a state law that on all historic buildings that the Mass Historical Society must approve it, or you can't do anything with it? Is that correct or not?
We could choose as a committee to not require restrictions, but it is considered best practice by the CPA State Coalition to protect taxpayer investment. And the process by which you secure a preservation restriction is to submit it through Mass Historic.
So that's ours. That's our committee's interpretation of that law. Would that be correct?
It's what the vast majority of CPCs do across the state. And not doing so would require some real conversation. I think
I want to qualify it. Is it to restore it to its original condition of 138 years ago, or just to maintain what's there now? That's what I just want to clarify.
I think that's the question, is if we submit this project, will Mass Historic, will they accept the work as historic preservation? It's an open question. Yeah, I think Marco has his hand up, and I know that Louis Salazar is also here, who I believe is a member of the Historic Commission, who may also want to speak as a member of the public. Marco, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think the general issue at hand is that people see that historic photo and go, oh my gosh, that would be great. Why doesn't the building look like that? And the fact is that, I don't know when, you could probably track when, but at some point, the building started falling apart and they took down there used to be some kind of a bell tower in the back, and there was this archway in the front, and there were, crenellated cornice along the side. And at some point, some renovation project happened, or perhaps the building, part of it might have, turned to not stable conditions, and part of it might have collapsed. And then in the rebuilding, somebody decided not to rebuild or to take down some of the architectural features. That in itself is part of the historic history of the project. So having the preservation restriction now would mean that they wouldn't remove any other historic features, and that the renovations would be according to the Mass Historic Guidelines. So we're preserving what's left of the building and calling those the renovations that were done, part of the historic process. So even though we all would love to see the building return to what it looked like in that old photo, that's not going to happen. And so what we're doing is we're preventing it from getting even worse if they decided to take down, the brickwork along the ground floor. So at best, we would get the building as it looks today, but the repointing, all the mortar in between the bricks might better match the repointing that's there. New bricks that are used to replace old bricks would better match the existing brick there. And, it's in our interest to do that because we don't want to further reduce the appearance, the historic appearance of the building. But I just want to make it clear that that building will not return back to its original appearance unless maybe a new tenant with deep pockets decides to, do something. And even then, it would have to be historically accurate to be part of the to meet the guidelines. They would not, instead of using brick, use Dryvit or some other, synthetic material or something. So I think the issue at hand is to get that image of the historic renovation, out. We're not going to return to that. We just have to accept the fact that it's going to look like it looks currently, only the repairs will be done more sensitively than they were done in the past. I hope that makes sense.
And I think again, Alon did a phenomenal job going through listing actually the standards and addressing that point in particular, where it actually the standard actually acknowledges that buildings will change over time, and so we addressed that in that. I think it's point 4 in the list of the 10 items.
Well, Madam Chairman, it's reasonable to assume that we need the Mass Historical Society's blessings to go. If I'm interpreting you correctly, do we need the Mass Historical Society's approval for this project? And exactly as it was described, it appears that it meets the requirements of the latest historical work done to it. As long as we maintain that same flavor, it's acceptable. So. I think we're doing fine. I don't see any reason why we couldn't go through with this.
Okay. I know that Israel Vera wants to speak, and so does Louis Salazar. Louis, do you want to speak first, just to continue hearing from members of the Historic Commission? Marco also sits on the Historic Commission.
Just to follow up with what Marco was saying, basically the more specific we are, it's a good strategy to go forward with. To get some sort of like a historical recognition. I think the building by itself, I don't think it's gonna be. I know I'm familiar with the standards, and there's one point that matches exactly what you're saying is looking forward to get. But I think there's other pieces that are really not in the same line. So I think the more, let's say, there's a part of the building that is, has a significant historical value. And in order to preserve that piece, we have to, create the conditions to make that happen. In being more specific, maybe we can find the solution for this problem, in my opinion.
Okay.
Finding one piece, something that has value by itself that we are not seeing, and it's not in the letter. So I think the more we specify historical value within the building, I think we have better chances to move forward.
Well, is there historic value in the building as it currently stands to preserve?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I
Like,
didn't
that's what
wanna
I
speak
want to
out of-
know, right?
I
Like,
didn't
it's
wanna-
been modified a lot over time. So is it still significant historically to preserve in its current form?
I would say that, excuse me if I'm speaking out of turn, but I would say yes, there is, because there's enough of it there that you can see and visualize what it used to look like. But I think we all have to understand that even those changes, which may have been aesthetically negative, like the new aluminum windows or removing, historic components of the old facade. And I'm mostly speaking about the facade that faces the street. There's a newer 1960s edition. I think it's the 60s, but there's nothing particularly historic about that. But if we don't preserve it, then they could remove even more of what's there now, and then the building would become even less pleasant to look at. So is there history there? It's definitely a historic site. A lot of stuff happened there that we want to know. There's enough of it there that you can look at and say, look, it does look nice. And if you match the mortar in some places where it doesn't match, if you clean up the effervescence, I think efflorescence, along the sidewalk, and so it doesn't, all that white, patchy, cloudy stuff goes away. It's a handsome building. It's just not as handsome as it used to be because of the insensitive renovations, which are a part of the history of the building. So if we don't do anything, they could do renovations now that continue the downwards, historic spiral of that building. They could remove, more historic stuff. Trying to preserve what's there, what's remaining is our goal there, so that even though it's not pristine, there's enough there to appreciate.
I know Israel and Mary want to speak, and then back to Louis Salazar.
I guess I'll go first. For me, I guess my question is like, how recent are like the modifications or whatever remodels they did? Because if it's been like 100 years since they did the last modification, then right, that would be historic in a sense. Still, if it was like 50 years, if we're talking 5 to 8 to 10 years, then that might be something different to consider. But then again, I don't know. I'm not a historian. I would probably defer to a Mass Historic Commission too, as well, with regards to making a decision with regards to that, and try to be consistent across the board. Because if we're not, then later on in the future, another project will come down the road, and if we don't vote on that project that has something similar, then I don't know, like people will start thinking different things if we're not consistent across the board. That's another piece too. But thank you. My daughter's crying, so I gotta pay attention to her too.
I could maybe speak really quickly to when we think the renovations were last done. We know that the wing that Marco mentioned was built in the 1960s, and the windows in that wing look very similar to the windows that are in the rest of the building. So it's a guess that the renovations, the significant renovations that really changed the front facade, were probably done in the 1960s. When the 1960 wing was added. That's a guess, though. I haven't verified that or been able to track down records for it.
Mary and then Louis Salazar.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So along with Izzy's comment about consistency, yeah, I think that's pretty important. If we've made a rule to abide by the business of having a historic conservation restriction on historic monies, are on projects that are asking for historic preservation monies, then we do have to do that. Is there a way of having someone reach out to the Mass Historic Commission and verify whether we would, whether this would pass or not? If we're asking for a historic preservation on just the foundation, would they go along with that? So can someone reach out to them?
So in general, what we found is they want to preserve the exterior as a whole, not in pieces, because they really they see the value is in the property as a whole. And it's just a process. So it's a time piece, right? It's like drafting a preservation restriction that names the scope of work and the history of the building. So there's some significant research and effort that has to go into creating that document and then sending it to Mass Historic and then waiting for feedback. And that could take 30 to 90 days. And then you go from there. So it's just not a fast, there's no quick way. In other words, I wish there were.
Then, we would have committed the money. They would have felt as though their needs were going to be met. And then we could down the road hear that, no, it's not, it's a no-go. I'd like to know a little earlier than that. There's no way of
we can commit a recommendation of funding, and we can draft the PR and send it to Mass Historic, and no contract would be developed or signed until that PR had been approved. So it slows the process down. But based on the city solicitor, she believes that in general, and this project is a little different because it's not already on the state register. So like a project that's already in the state register, Mass Historic already has some significant information already in their system. And so it's easier to get a review process going. It's a little more timely when it's a new project to them.
And then if we make it does go through, does it then prevent the owner from changing, making further changes that would disintegrate the historic value of the building? So would the one historic what?
So the preservation restriction is a document that's held by the Historic Commission, and this says that we will not make any significant changes to the exterior of the building without running those changes within 30 days before those changes occur to the Historic Commission and getting there. Yeah, this looks good.
Yeah. Would that be an incentive to those who are involved to see this as a viable project?
Are you speaking to Girls Inc.?
I guess to whoever might know the answer.
I mean, in terms of how this could slow down their project start, like waiting for Mass Historic. Is that your question?
Well, I was just wondering if perhaps Mass Historic would say yes, based on the concept that this building now would be somewhat protected from further, destruction of the historic features.
I think my question, and then I want to let Louis speak, is more about the piece that's on the lift and the entry vestibule work. Especially, I mean, it's described in the letter, and we can see from the images from the presentation that that's a really modern redoing of that section of the building. And so that's a question for me around, like, that's really adding a new modern feature to the building. Doesn't feel like historic preservation.
Sure, and I can speak to that a little bit. And in fact, this is something that we frequently come up against in historic buildings that are not accessible, is how do we integrate accessibility into the building without taking away from the historic fabric and what has been approved by Mass Historic on other state and national registered historic buildings is to provide something that is distinctly different from the existing building so that you can see where the history is and where it changes. And we've had a similar project in East Hampton, the East Hampton Old Town Hall, where we proposed a contemporary addition, such as the one that is proposed here for Girls Inc., and it was approved by Mass Historic for exactly that reason, that it is distinctly different. We're not trying to falsely show that it was part of the original building, if that makes sense.
Okay, Louis? Oh, you're muted.
Just to add, like the pieces is important to, in order to, like, I think for the luck of the future of the project, to just be more specific about what are we saving, what are we protecting. I think it's not just in general that the O'Connell House, but it's like the kind of be more look more in detail about what exactly we are trying to preserve. I'm in favor of preserving the building no matter what. I think that's, if that requires, you know, this project to happen, I think I'm in favor. I think as Marco. But I feel like it doesn't have enough detail, in my opinion, and it's just an opinion, for sure.
I can just so actually for the funding, it's going to be devoted specifically to repairing the masonry work for the building. And so it's really the envelope of the building and also the slate roof. There is this amazing slate roof that, you know, needing to be worked on there. So I'm trying to think how, you know, I can provide more detail on that, but so it really is preserving the envelope of the building, the masonry and the slate roof.
Elaine?
Thank you. No, this has actually been really interesting, and I appreciate everyone's point of view. I think one piece that is occurring to me about this project, but maybe just like as something that would be helpful in general as time goes on, is more direction from State Historical Commission or some engagement about the fact that a lot of the projects in Holyoke are related to industrial buildings and factory buildings and warehouses and buildings that would have been changed appropriately as time went on because of the kind of industrial nature of the history of this community, as opposed to what I think is like the template, which is like preserving, you know, brownstones in like Back Bay or something, or preserving them on Beacon Hill, right? Like, I think I think there is some differences there in that here the history is this kind of the different industries that came in, so they're going to modify buildings and so it would be, you know, helpful, and the facades are really, you know, beautiful, and to be able to preserve as much as possible, because it does seem like we're going to come across where it's going to require like all of our money to preserve a building to the extent that, you know, that if you're thinking about that kind of that level of like pristine return to original, and that may not be necessary. And so I guess I wonder if there's some guidance about that and about kind of the industrial buildings and their historical significance being a little bit different than maybe, you know, first period colonial houses in Ipswich or something like that. So that's my thought, and I feel like that would be useful information to have going forward, that I feel is very specific to the kinds of historical buildings we would want to preserve in Holyoke.
I do feel like, and I said this to Ms. Parker when we talked on the phone, this has been a learning process for us as a committee. And so I named that like in the first breath that I took in that conversation around, you know, we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. It's also a learning curve for the Historic Commission, who is now holding these preservation restrictions that we're developing for the first time. So it does require some real collaboration between our committees, and I want to thank Marco and Louis for their work and for being here tonight to speak from their expertise, because they have a layer of expertise that many of us do not have, right? I had a conversation with the Historic Commission Chair, Paula Ferrario, last week, where we've actually been discussing a very different workflow moving forward with historic projects. even potentially on a different timeline. Because the reality is what we're discovering is that historic projects that require a PR are just going to move at a really different pace. And there's interstitial steps that have to exist that currently don't exist in our project, right? So maybe we have to start with these projects earlier in the year to create more space for things like, let's send let's draft this and send it out to Mass Historic and get feedback before we're sending the batch of projects to City Council. So it may just be that as we're discovering this process this year, just the first year that we've had to develop preservation restrictions, I think we're figuring it out. It's just taking time. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Ms. Parker, and also bringing in your architect is really great too. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to hear from Carrie Parsons, and then I'm also going to read a letter from New England Farm Workers. Welcome, Carrie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm Carrie Parsons from the Miracle League. If you have not met me yet, it is nice to see you. Thanks for having me back. I know there were some additional questions on the playground. I do have a bit of exciting news. After a lot of back and forth, and I've had contractors, there was a question about the brick wall, the Highland School brick wall that we were trying to move. So I have contacted several contractors in several departments in the city who cannot tell me who originally built the wall. So the contractors who I spoke with said that they were not 100% on giving a quote without knowing what was inside of that wall. So like I said, after a lot of back and forth, I went back to my site designer and we redesigned the playground, and it fits without touching the wall, flagpole, or tree. So none of that would be touched, or we would not need to add funds to a budget or anything like that. And I have an aerial view of it. You can't really tell what's what on it, but I can show you. We just moved a couple things around, and so as you can see, like this is the playground, the walls here, the sidewalk. We're going inside. This is a shadow of the tree, so it's not on top of the tree. It's not near the tree. So after all of that, now we don't need to do that. So that's really good. So we were excited to do that. But I'm not sure if there were any other questions about the playground that anybody had besides that and the additional funding for that.
Does the committee have any other questions? Yes, Michael.
Carrie, just refresh my memory, what is the budgeted amount you're requesting at this point in time for the complete project?
So we initially requested $350,000. That was before we were aware of the prevailing rate. So that added about, about 30,000 to it. So, we would like to ask for 380.
So is there a way, just because that takes up a significant chunk of our budget, right? And these are all hard choices, because if we fully fund a playground at 380, we may not be able to support Girls Inc., or we may not be able to support another very worthy project. So I know that you've done some significant fundraising, particularly with the Rotary, but also through your own capital campaign and some grassroots funding. But do you think that there's a way that $30,000 could be raised from the community without us providing it directly from the committee?
I do, and we're not stopping fundraising. Obviously, we are unsure if we will even be funded. So we normally have 4 fundraisers a year. There are 4 major fundraisers besides smaller things and PayPal donations and things like that. So we were not able to have the first quarter just because of the COVID uptick, but we have our golf tournament already planned. It's already well on its way. That's in May. Generally, we raise a decent amount of money for that. And then our other larger fundraiser is a comedy night in October, which usually raises about 10,000. So, I mean, if we were funded an amount, I think we would then be able to go out in the community and say, okay, we need $50,000 to build this playground. So we have the backing of the CPC with CPA funding. So we need this, and this is what we need to raise. And I think that was really where the problem for us was, because we were going out into the community saying, we need $450,000. And everybody was like, you're crazy. So if we, you know, we've raised a little over 100,000, Holyoke Rotary in that 100,000, Holyoke Rotary has given us $30,000 towards the playground. So if we were then to say, we only need this amount, we could go to businesses and say, you know, help us. We can put a bench for, you know, McDonald's or wherever, you know, any local business who wants to give us a specific amount of money. And I think we could raise that through the public, but I don't think we would be able to do that without your help.
Thank you. Michael?
Carrie, is the total amount you need to do the complete project $380,000? Is that the full amount from A to Z? Is that it?
Nope. So I can share this one more time. So we received an updated budget when we found out about the prevailing rate. So you can see the total of our project is $477,000.
So out of the 477, you're seeking 380 from the CPA.
That's correct.
Because the rest you've already raised as a basically all volunteer organization, right?
We are an all volunteer organization. We have raised it on our own through our own fundraising. And that little extras we also found, and again, with, you know, just the first time going through this process, that we would need a little additional funding for CPA signage. So that was why it was rounded up to that 80, because we were told it would be between 2,500 and 3,000 in CPA signage.
All right, are there any other questions? Okay. All right. Oh, you want to speak, Israel? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I think it's an awesome project. Just to say, if we gave it 350 is what I'm hearing, right? If we still granted the 350, you guys would try to launch a campaign to raise the other 30,000, pretty much, to try to. My bad for the music in the background. My daughter's watching.
No, that's okay.
Everybody probably already watched 1,000 times. But,
that's absolutely correct.
All right. If that were to happen, that would be awesome. Well, good luck on.
Thank you.
The endeavor and all that other stuff. Now that's it for me.
Thanks, Sissy.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
One more question. Oh, sorry. Is Carrie?
I'm here. Yep. No, I'm here.
So I know we talked about this before, but I just, wanted to, because this sort of came up with parks, and I wanted to kind of hit home that really there is very little in the parks that is accessible to all children, which is, that's a problem. And so this would really change the landscape of that. And I think we had, my understanding is the closest thing that comes anywhere close is in Longmeadow. And then there's a park in Westfield that is not at this scale, but has somewhat adapted. So just if you wanted to speak to the kind of uniqueness of the opportunity. I know we talked about it before, but I just wanted to put in the context of the rest of our parks, I think this is definitely something we should be thinking about as Parks Commission, is how to increase accessibility throughout the parks as much as possible. But to have this fully accessible park would be very, very unique and would really change the accessibility, that Holyoke offers. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more, but I wanted to provide that context.
No, I agree. Obviously I agree with everything you said. It's really helpful for an all abilities park, especially, with families with more than one child in the family or even an adult. Somebody may have a disability or a special need. And this would be the only park in Holyoke that they can bring their entire family to. When families go out and there's a child who needs, additional assistance, they're like, oh gosh, can't go here. I can't bring this kid here. I can't bring, this kid here because so to be able to actually bring your entire family somewhere when leaving the house is already stressful, and some don't even leave the house because it's just too hard, to be able to bring your entire family to a park that you can sit and watch and be comfortable with all of your children playing, knowing that they can get on and up and around on everything and play together. And it's just including everybody. I can't speak enough about that it's just so important. And I would like to say too, we would encourage, so the Miracle League would encourage anyone and everyone to come to one of our baseball games just to see our population and our kids. It's a place where families meet and the parents become friends and the kids are friends. And this park could be one of those places where people can gather and just create relationships and bounce different ideas that work for their family and things like that. So our spring season starts in May and it's on our website, but we would encourage everybody to come and check out a game and just really see how great it is.
Thank you. Mary, you had your hand up too.
Yes, at the last meeting, and I have it in the minutes, I think it was, I'm not sure who it was, but questions were raised in regards to who would own this park, and was there, who would be responsible for maintenance of these special pieces of equipment? And also, is there any need for additional insurance in the event that on this special equipment, someone is injured? So I'm not sure, those who asked the questions, if it's been satisfied. Do we know the answers to those questions?
Well, I know that the city would own the park because it's on city property.
Okay.
So it would be city owned. So that would mean that they would be responsible for the insurance and the maintenance of it. We do have some paperwork that was sent in with our application about the maintenance of the park. That was included in our initial application.
And so Helene and John, are you satisfied with that? Helene, I think because you're the parks person, and John, I think you asked the question.
I did, if I could jump in. Who would own the equipment? Would the equipment be owned by the city of Holyoke?
The city, yeah.
So they actually own the equipment. So if somebody was injured, God forbid, on the equipment or fell in the park, they would actually be it'd be issues with them in the city of Holyoke.
It would be.
That's very important. You got to play devil's advocate today, but God forbid if someone got hurt on that equipment, they're going to major lawsuit. And we have to make sure that, radically insured that equipment then becomes a property of the city of Holyoke. It is not, it won't be the property of the Miracle League, it'll be the property of the city of Holyoke, you're telling me.
I see Israel's hand up.
I would assume that it would fall under the same guidelines. I mean, we could check with legal, but it would fall under the same guidelines as any other kid that would get hurt at the park, at any other park.
Well, the difference here right now is that the applicant, it's not like, the city of Holyoke goes out and buys equipment for the parks that we own as a city. This is a nonprofit corporation buying equipment that they're buying, so they actually own that equipment.
And
so they're actually going to donate or turn it over to the city of Holyoke. And how's this going to work out from that perspective? And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been involved in my career in enough liability situations. I hate to play devil's advocate here, but we have to be very careful, make sure that we dot our T's and cross our I's, that if this project goes forward, that people are adequately protected and insured, for any injury that they could occur on this equipment. Or trip, falling in the park, et cetera. And I think that's something that's got to go by legal.
I am a lawyer, so I don't do products liability law. So I'm not gonna go from there. But from a different perspective, I do think it's also important that I mean, the equipment is getting bought and is basically a gift once it's all put together to Holyoke. We're potentially paying for a lot of it, so that's reasonable. But I do want to make sure that the concern is not related to the fact that it would be a substantial folks like who have disabilities would be there. My understanding is that because of that, the folks that build and create these parks, their safety is very important, and that's really built in. So it's probably a much safer park in many ways, but also that we wouldn't not offer something to folks of all abilities, or we would be concerned about that because of this aspect that they would be somehow more of a liability to the community. So I just want to be clear that that's not something we would consider, because that has its own kind of legal ramification. So the Parks Department is going, and the new director, when they come on, is going to have to maintain it the way we have to maintain other parks. It does seem like it is this big resource that we could have, and so it would be sad to not, nobody in parks has raised that as being something that would be prohibited, and that we're very much in favor of this project. So that's my feeling about it, and speaking for the commission.
Israel, do you know if a holistic liability and insurance policy is held by the city?
I don't know the exact policy or whatnot. I think that's something that we should probably get back to legal and try to get some real terminology on it, so that way we're not just talking out of assumptions or whatnot with regards to that. But I just wanted to say with regards to, if we're gonna fund the project, if we do, right, and we end up funding 350 or 380, in a sense, the taxpayers are technically paying for the park, right? And the Miracle League of Western Mass took the initiative to raise money and push us in the direction of doing something that we should be doing as a community. And I appreciate them as a nonprofit to do that, and any other nonprofit that's trying to inspire us to change the dynamics of our parks and reach out to our community overall. But yeah, I would suggest going to legal to get at least an understanding of what the insurance policies, and if there is any differences with regards to what we're putting in the playscape, because if there is, then I'm with Helene, where maybe we should try to explore how that's totally unfair that we're going to be charged more because of a potential liability because of someone's disability.
No, I just want to jump in again. I think it's a great project. I think it's 100% a wonderful project. And I think to Helene's point, I think if I heard you correctly, Helene, the plan is for them to kind of gift this equipment to the city of Holyoke. So therefore the city of Holyoke owns it. It's like any other equipment. That was my key question is who owns it, because the ownership is key to it. But if it's going to be gifted to the city of Holyoke, then it's going to come under, I'm sure, the same kind of guidelines of protection as any park we have existing already. But that answers my question. So as it's gifted to the city, it's not the property of a nonprofit, because if it became the property of a nonprofit, then they'd have to go out and get that stuff insured, against things. But that was really my key question.
I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question then, but that totally makes sense. That yes, and that's why we're paying, the prevailing wage, and of course that increases it a bit, but then it's it's accessible at all the times the parks are open, as opposed to being in a space that isn't. So as we talked about before, but I think obviously it's a very good question, and I appreciate it.
Very good question. Very good question.
And I think we're all on board as far as it's a great project. We just want to make sure that we don't have issues down the road with any liability. But that answers that question. I just gonna ask one other thing. I think Carrie, I don't know if I asked this last time, but have you explored it all? You probably have. As far as a lot of times, the unions are very good at doing some in-kind work as far as the installation might be concerned? I don't know if you've gone down that road to try to reduce your costs.
We have. We've talked to a few very local companies who are very much wanting to help and will, unsure of how yet because we don't know where we're at. But they said, when you are ready, make sure you come to us first because we want to help. And one has already helped built that park in Westfield. So they are equipped, able, and know how to do that. We also very, very much would like to, at some point in some portion of this build, do a community build to get the community involved with it as well. Obviously, they can't dig the holes or, pour the in-place rubber, but, building slides and very much what like the YMCA did a few years ago. I was a part of that, and that was just so great to be a volunteer, and it gets the community excited and involved, and that is something that we would like to explore. So also help on costs. We don't have those numbers yet, so hopefully, if you fund us, we'll be able to give some back to you. But we just don't know that right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Carrie, and answering all of our questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I have a letter from New England Farm Workers that I'm going to read into the record. It says, Dear Ms. McGrath-Smith and members of the committee, thank you for emailing me on February 17th, 2022, the video clip of the meeting held on February 16th. I would like to respond to the public commentary read into the record that evening. In response to the various public comments, I offer the following responses. The requirements for the Community Preservation Act funding application limit the wording of the narratives such that the applications do not become exhaustive. And our application was meant to provide very brief commentary on the required topics. The application mentions clearly that 225 High Street would be home to New England Farm Workers Council, programming activities, and the Latino Chamber of Commerce. Further, the application asks if there is community support for the project. Leadership for Partners for Community, PFC, which is the management agency that oversees New England Farm Workers Council, has had informal communications on a number of issues specific to Holyoke, with various individuals that are members of the Chamber of Commerce and with individuals associated in some manner with E4All over the last few months as this project concept is being formulated. We did not intend for the application to indicate that these organizations would relocate to the building, but simply if space was available for functions, events, and trainings, we would welcome their participation as the space previously served the community in that manner. Additional commentary was had related to the letters of support from Senator Vilas and Representative Duffy being in support of the ARPA effort to bring funds to Holyoke and not for the preservation project. The letters dated December 28th, 2021, titled 225 High Street Community Preservation Project, have their first sentences referencing support for the preservation project. Further, their letters indicate that they have worked to bring collectively to Holyoke funds to support the Latino Chamber of Commerce business initiative in Holyoke. Through their efforts, the Latino Chamber of Commerce initiative secured $150,000 to be used in Holyoke for the benefit of Holyoke-based small and startup businesses. Commentary at the meeting also referenced that CPA fundings should not be used for a Springfield-based company. Though it is true that New England Farm Workers Council is Springfield-based, it has had employees serving Holyoke residents in the properties it owned or leased in Holyoke for decades. In fact, New England Farm Workers Council presently owns 5 properties on High and Main Street with a combined assessment of $2.1 million, in which New England Farm Workers Council paid $86,871.16 in taxes to the city of Holyoke for fiscal year 2022. New England Farm Workers Council has been a taxpayer for many years in Holyoke. Additional commentary was made about the suitability of this project to receive Community Preservation Act funding. Projects just like this are funded by dozens of municipalities every year across the Commonwealth. In fact, as identified in the application section of how this project meets the general and category-specific priorities in the Holyoke Community Preservation Plan, the following statement was included in our application. The ball block is located within the North High Street Historic District. The HCPP specifically lists the use of CPA funds for preservation of significant public buildings and cultural facilities. Other historic community assets, CPA funding can be used to rehabilitate features of public open spaces such as parks, memorials, or cemeteries. CPA can also be used to prevent the loss or defacement of privately owned historic properties or to restore historic features of privately owned buildings where they are visible or accessible to the public. Certainly, this project and the expected future use fit the description above. An additional comment referenced an error in one of the estimates that was provided in the application once again. When this was brought to our attention at the initial meeting, I amended the application to correct the error the next day. Further, New England Farm Workers Council will also be participating in the project with additional funding of approximately $181,533, which would include the replacing of the balance of the windows. Being in government as well as both an elected person and an appointed executive for a combined 20 years, I know firsthand that mistakes are made frequently by government employees, committee members, and elected officials, and by human beings in all walks of life in general. I would have thought that our effort to apologize for the mistake and make the prompt correction would have been better received and not a point of repeated criticism. An additional comment was made concerning the 2020 tax filing for New England Farm Workers Council, and a review of the IRS Form 9090 would indicate that we had sufficient funds to pay for the project itself. New England Farm Workers Council is a human service, not-for-profit agency. The agency receives state and federal funding, of which the vast majority, approximately 87%, passes through to the individuals and clients we serve. After salary and operating expenses, including utilities, basic upkeep of properties, insurances, and paying taxes, there is very little excess revenue. New England Farm Workers Council and Partners for the Community employees are excited for the future of Holyoke and are committed to working every day to make Holyoke a great place to live, work, and play for its citizens and visitors. Presently, we employ 19 full-time staff members that serve over 160 clients at 3 of our locations in Holyoke. Our goal is to assist with future growth and wealth development in Holyoke. Further, we believe that the 225 High Street project can be a major catalyst to achieve that end. We thank you for your consideration of our application for funding. Best regards, Stan Napick, Executive Director of Partners for the Community. I need a glass of water. Okay. So I wanted to make sure that I read that into the record. And you know, I thought it was great. I emailed them and said, you know, here's the video, watch it, and please respond, right? Do you want to come to our meeting? Do you want to respond? So they did a really great job of putting their due diligence in to respond to the points that came up in the conversation. And I think we've heard from a lot of applicants tonight. So, and some of this is new information, right? So folks may have come in kind of feeling like, oh, I was leaning towards this project, right? But it's complicated, right? And we now have a number of really good projects in front of us. I'm gonna paste them. Thank you, Amy, for doing this in the chat. So we have a few projects left to consider. It does not want me to send it. Let's try one more time. Amy, you're gonna have to pass that paste it back in. It's not letting me. Your comment to me about all the amounts, Miracle League 350, Girls Inc.
You want me to repost that?
Yeah, can you send it to everybody? I don't know why it won't let me copy and then send it.
I'm trying. Okay.
If you can't, that's okay.
I can. I think I can do it. Okay.
So we have a number of projects to consider. We have the Miracle League. And do you want to put the amounts they're asking for too?
I put the amounts. Do you want the scoring info too?
The scoring is what you put in. If you could also put in the amounts for funding.
I just sent that to, oh, okay. I just put the scoring. Okay. Instead of the amounts. All right. I'll do the amounts.
That's great. We need both. So Miracle League is asking for between 350 and 380. Girls Inc. is asking for 150. The YMCA Playground is asking for 290.90 or 900 rather. MIFA Sconces are asking for 113. The train station is asking for 200. And New England Farm Workers is asking for 321,943. So we have the 480,90105 left to recommend funding for, with a little bit of a cushion, and that we do know that the 90 grand is going to come back from Armor and Co. I just have to make sure that we follow the formal process of making sure that that money is no longer encumbered before we can recommend it.
We also have the scores there, which I think that put in twice, Amy, instead of the.
I know I can't copy and paste from the chat for some reason, but I'm trying to do it onto a Word document so I can send you it. It's just opening, so I'll do it as soon as I can.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So you can see the average scoring from how our committee scored each project. Doesn't mean, however, that with this, increased information or additional information we've gotten, that some of your scores may have changed, right? So this becomes a way for us to know as a committee where we're currently standing, or at least we're standing at the time before this meeting. And we can use these scores as a way to know which projects we want to start talking. We can talk about them individually, but also at this point, we're also sort of talking about them against each other. So the highest scored ones were the Miracle League and the Girls Inc. projects, followed by the YMCA. So Miracle League was 32, was an average score. Girls Inc. was an average of 29. YMCA was an average of a 26. MIFA Victory Theater, score of 24. Train Station of 21, and New England Farm Council of 20.7. Although some folks might score them more highly now, having heard this response from the applicant, right? I know we had significant questions at the time. That letter might have satisfied those concerns. Thank you, Mimi. Okay. I'd like to hear what we think. What are folks leaning into?
Sorry, can we just say the full amount that's left again?
Sure, I'll put it into the chat too.
Okay, thank you. And numbers don't stick in my head the way they should.
So,
Madam Chairman,
are there any we don't like?
I mean, we have really good projects in front of us, right? I think there are projects that are great in theory, but might have something that would dissuade me from voting for them. I think it's hard for me to, want to sink a big chunk of taxpayer funding without an applicant being willing to accept a restriction on that funding.
Yeah.
So for me, that rules out the train station, which is actually kind of a soul crushing piece because I love the train station. And it's in our preservation plan. Like I want to see it preserved, but I don't think our role is in the community necessarily aligns with its current development.
I agree.
What was that amount, Madam Chairman, for the train station?
200,000. The sconces, I feel like the sconces give me this feeling of we may get to a point where we've preserved all these pieces of the Victory Theater, but not the theater itself. Right? The murals and the sconces, and but have no, and I think the sconces in particular are tough because if we move forward, where do they go? Right. So at least with the murals, and even that's been tricky, right? Where are they going to go? And it was sort of represented like they could go in the ballroom, and then, maybe we could put them here, but we're not sure. Maybe we're going to look for a different site. Like the sconces have no clear place they can go. When I spoke to Bob Parent, he felt like if you would electrically, like the sconces are meant to be installed. Right. So like the work that you would put in to electrify and install them to be used somewhere, to like theoretically then at a later date when the theater is restored to like rip them out and like replaster over the damage you've caused by pulling them out. I don't know. Like it seemed really tricky. So that part to me, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, Michael.
Madam Chairman, we could, if we so choose to fund, by way of an example, the sconces, we just put in our conditions of the award is that until the building is fully funded, period, then we'll release the money. If you're not fully funded, give it 3 years.
I feel
then
that way
you
too,
don't-
but we did that
then
once
we don't
before,
award
and
the
it came
money.
back
That's
to
part
us.
of the contract. If you're not fully funded and you don't have the money to go through it complete, you don't get the money. And we keep the money, but that's the way it is.
But
Then we don't have to worry about sconces that we've paid for and what we're going to do with them. We'll give you the money, but you'll get an award when the building is finished and you're fully funded, not before.
Israel and then John.
But then I mean I hear that piece too, Mr. Falsetti. But the thing is that like I don't know if we should be in the business of tying up money for a couple of years too with people that are like putting projects. I think for me with Victory Theater, I love the project. I want it to happen. But just with the new information that just came forward from the public health department and the building department, I would want to have a conversation with them to say, listen, figure that out before we continue to give you more money, because at the end of the day, we're just freezing it. We're going to be freezing it until you figure out what's happening with that little $18,000 piece right there first, right? And then after that, it's going to the next level. I mean, if it's if it's the ruling of the commission for us to give it to them and have them hold $300,000 or $400,000 for 3 or 4 years, then I mean that's cool. But I think that money for me, money like this is for it to be spent and to have impact immediately. That's just the way I see it. But sometimes it doesn't always work that way, and I understand that. But in this process, they already have some money held up. They would be having more money held up, and then they also have issues with some of the stuff that's happening at the city level. So it's like trying to figure out how to navigate that before we give them more. That would just be my opinion. But I hear you, Mr. Falsetti, on that piece, though. That is possible too.
I would love a real sense of plan. Like if the Victory Theater came to us and said, here's our 5-year window. We know we can secure this funding here, this funding here. I mean, our committee can bond. Somebody could come to us and be like, we want $1 million. And we could effectively like kind of write ourselves out of business for a couple years. And be like, yes, we're going to bond for $1 million. And every single year for X number of years, we're going to put every single CPC dollar that we get towards that loan that we got to pull off this thing. There are CPC communities who've done that, right? But I feel like it's hard to, I think, Michael, because we already did that once and it came back to us because they, it's hard because you got to get money to get more money, right? And they've gotten stuck. They've done such good work to raise funding, right? They have raised millions and millions of dollars, and yet the project's really expensive and complicated. And so they're still, I think by our last meeting that we had with them, they were still $10 million shy. But that's like, they're 75% of the way towards the project. It's like, it's, but not there yet, right? With still kind of a significant gap that they haven't addressed how they're gonna cross that gap. John, I know you wanted to talk.
Yeah, thank you. I hear what you're saying, Michael, but I think Councilor Rivera, I'm in total agreement with what Councilor Rivera said. I'd hate to take money, put it aside that cannot be used for other projects, and as much as our entire lifetime for the Victory Theater. As a matter of fact, they came before the planning board about 1.5 years ago. They're going to be finished last December. With a $2 million gap, and quite frankly, I think the gap is probably going to be more than $10 million as we see costs escalating and inflation, taking off. So, we've done the murals, we've committed to those, but I think just chipping away, 30, 40,000 here and there on that project is taking the money away from some other good cause where we see kind of instant improvement or instant use of the money. So I would not be inclined to do any more for the Victory right now. I just think they're years away if we ever see that project to fruition.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak? Okay. So that leaves talking about Miracle League Girls Inc., YMCA, and New England Farm Workers Council. It might make sense to talk about YMCA versus Miracle League. I feel like we have these two playgrounds, and the sense I'm getting is that folks are really excited about the Miracle League playground because it's just such a really unique concept and addressing a really important and unique community need. And so I'm getting the sense that folks are leaning towards, if we were going to support a playground, we would support we would support the Miracle League playground over the YMCA playground. So how are we there? Am I reading the room correctly? I'm seeing
I'll
some
do Miracle League instead of YMCA.
I think for me, if I may, it's what changes the perception. Well, there's two things. One is the uniqueness of the project, but the other is I'm sorry, she's on some real life.
She's great. I mean, you were like before. It was wonderful.
I'm gonna say, the fact that it's on public property is what sways me the most, right? That nobody can say that nobody can not go to that park ever because it's a public property, right? All the other projects, they're all great, but they're not all public property. We will be taking tax dollars to enhance private property, whether or not there is historic preservation or it's a park or whatnot. It's cool. I think the YMCA does deserve a new park. But the Miracle League of Western Mass, that would be the first park of its kind in Holyoke. That sways it. And then the other piece is it would improve the imprint of that park over there. Like now it's like we should now invest in the park next to it. Like as a Parks and Rec, I mean, I'm not Parks and Recs anymore, but hopefully Parks and Recs commission with their new director, they look at trying to find a strategic plan on how to invest into that park too as well within the next 5 years. To catch it up to a park that could possibly happen, that'd be on the other side. The only thing for me is how much of money it would take up. Like that's the only drawback for me. But I don't know. It depends on how, if we can be creative, give them a chunk now and then a chunk on the next piece, right? On the next round, it like that way it doesn't hit us all in one shot. If there's a way to do that, that would be great, because then if we could do that, we could possibly do two projects, right, with this chunk of money, because of where the fiscal year ends and begins. If it's possible to do that, that would be cool. But if not, then I don't know. The only drawback for me on that project is how much it costs. But other than that, that would be my lead. The other ones ultimately is the 290 and the 150. The 150 would be great. You could probably do the one. I don't know. So I feel like
we can't do the New England Farm Workers building and the Miracle League playground. Like those two things financially don't work. So if we are choosing to fund the Miracle League playground, then we will have to say no to New England Farm Workers, just because financially there's no way to make that work.
Yeah, they're not in my conversation for me. They could apply again next time. That's how I would see it for them. So that's just my opinion. Go ahead.
I'm also leaning towards, I know she said, it'd be great if we could have the full 380. I would not want to do that. One, because I want to be thoughtful about how we spend our money, and I feel like they can raise it. I do. Like, I think if the project is really close, also it gives the community some pride to be like, yeah, we came up with the last mile, right? Like we carried it across the finish line. So I'm tempted more to lean into the 350 than I am into the 380, especially if I'm knowing, right, with that 90K that's coming back from Armor & Co. that allows us to then, if we wanted to fund Girls Inc. and the Miracle League playground, we could do both. If one was at 150 and one was at 350.
Madam Chairman, isn't that 380 for the Miracle League? Isn't that 380?
So when they looked at the prevailing wage, their ask went from 350 to 380, but that's if they don't do any additional fundraising. And she said in the conversation, like, we already know our comedy night brings in 10,000, right? We know that we're doing this golf tournament. Like, I'm hearing numbers in my head around, like, they're gonna be able to raise some significant money already based on what they normally do. And then on top of that, they can go to the community and say, hey, we're still looking for
$10,000 and be able to crowdfund it.
I don't want to argue against the number, but I do. I mean, they're just continuing. They've raised 100,000. A good chunk of that from Rotary, but I think she said 30,000. So, I mean, for a fully volunteer group to be this effective is pretty cool. And but I mean, they're just like, we want this playground. We're just going to keep fundraising, but if we help out, then that means that it's not 15 years down the road, or 20 years. It really creates a situation where it can happen sooner. And I think with just as was discussed, John brought up like inflation and cost. I mean, I think just playground equipment costs are just going to keep going up. So I certainly think that their feeling is if they have much more leverage if we can put in terms of getting other funding or going to the community, if we have put in a good chunk of the money. And I guess I also just to point out, like, they're not resistant to fundraising. Like they've got a plan. They do fundraising. They're so committed. So I think that that this really can it's a game changer in terms of the money. But I also get the sense that they, if they would be very willing to try to leverage funds and are. I think the word is like practical about it. Does that make sense? Like, okay, like let's work with you guys and answering questions. And even, a volunteer organization that's like, oh, we could redesign this and then we don't have this other expense. It's just a sort of kind of like accountability and nimbleness.
In our scoring guidelines, it's called like due diligence, right? Like they've really showed their due diligence around like, we're going to chase this stuff up. We're going to give you every detail. We're going to, I totally agree with that. Michael.
Madam Chairman, I would support it if we gave them half now and half next year. I think the one fell swoop is just too much of a bite out of our existing budget. It's a great program, great park, no question. But I would prefer to give them half now and half out of next year's budget. Okay. I'm not making a motion. I'm just.
Yeah. I hear that. John?
Yeah, in reality, I'd love to see this park up and running by June of this year, but I think that's, to Michael's point, to Councilor Rivera's points, it's probably unrealistic just trying to get stuff even delivered and ordered in this day and age. But if we either, I think Councilor Rivera earlier said maybe we can like maybe purchase it for this year and then next fiscal year look at the installation. My guess is if they even had all the money right now and ordered it, they probably did not have it delivered for installation this coming season. I just think the way things are, trying to get either delivery and contractors, that might not be possible. I think to Lee's points too, that, if they could go out and say that we've committed X number of dollars to them for this project, I don't really see who would refuse helping them out. I mean, it's such a tremendous thing to do, and it's meeting the need of a population that is certainly deserving of having a park. And I think if they went to the corporations and we went out, to the general public, like the outside Stop and Shop with a canister, I think they would just collect money left and right, because this is something that I think people would relate to and would fully support. So I kind of like the idea of giving them maybe a piece of the pie and then, take a look later on. But I think that would certainly give them some impetus, let them know we support them, and see what they do with fundraising.
So I think that I'm not hearing an appetite or emotion around New England Farm Workers, the train station,
the sconces or the YMCA playground. It seems like the two projects that most folks are interested in are Girls Inc. and the Miracle League playground.
Yeah.
And I think the question is just what funding are we going to propose? So I think I would like to make a motion that we recommend funding for $350,000 for the Miracle League playground. And if I have a second, then we can discuss it and then vote. And at this point in the process, right, folks can vote for, they can vote against, folks can try to amend the motion. We can try to vote again, right? And we get to, this is what we're all agreeing to, or at least what the majority of us are agreeing to.
Second.
All right, so I'll open up the floor for debate and discussion. I know that we've already sort of started having this discussion. So where do we fall in being able to, say yes or no to this vote of recommending $350,000 for the Miracle League playground? And don't forget, the city council has the capacity to approve, reject, or reprove and reduce funding for anything that we put forward. So they could say, sure, you're saying $350,000 for a Miracle League playground, but we'll give you $320,000. They can do that.
We have $480,000 left right now. $480,901, right?
Yeah. Plus
So
knowing that the 90K is coming back, but hasn't been formalized yet.
Right. So not being formalized, we're proposing committing $500,000 against $480,000 that we know we've got.
I mean, we know we have more. We also have other projects that have come in way under, like Pulaski came under thousands of dollars under. So, and that's why I was saying to you earlier, like there is extra funding. I just can't tell you like it's exactly this amount, but I know that it is definitely greater than $20,000. In other words, but I can't tell you it's 140 versus 137 or 120.
Okay. All right. But you're comfortable knowing that there will be money there to cover the full amount?
Yes. Mary, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I see the virtue of splitting the funds from one year to another, but I see greater virtue in giving them the amount of money needed to purchase what they need now. To me, that incentivizes, John, you mentioned that it would be hard for them to get the thing, the equipment delivered. It certainly would be even less incentive to deliver something on the part of the provider if it's only half there, if the money is only half there. So I really think that we have to provide the money for the whole park, or, do the whole thing now. Yeah, and I don't know that if it won't get there until, next year. But I think if you don't put all the money into it now, you won't get it next year either.
Well, you got to be thinking, Mary, the other side of the coin is the cost will be more next year.
Right.
True.
For context, right, with the Springdale Park renovation, the new parks, the new columpios, I want to say it in Spanish. In English, it's the slides and all the other stuff, right? We just received that. We ordered that like 2 years ago. So it's gonna take time regardless of the matter. But to kind of Mary's point and John's point is that the sooner we buy it, the cheaper the costs are gonna be, because inflation is only rising. And the way we're seeing it right now, it's ridiculous, right? But ultimately, at the same time, I think that giving them the 350 now would allow for them to possibly raise maybe more than the 30. Like, who's to say that they won't raise more than the 30 within the time span of them actually starting to build this? This can be like a larger campaign if they run it like a capital campaign with the whole community initiative. If they say we got 350, we only need 30 to get to the next point. They don't have to technically say we only need 30. We just need to raise more funds. And if they raise 50 to 60 or even 100, that takes money off of what we're giving them later on in the long run. It gives them the opportunity to be able to, like you guys have said, I don't want to reiterate what other people say and like reappropriate it. It just gives them the opportunity to leverage funds. with the
You
350.
could put that as a term in a condition in
Right.
the contract too, that any, funds raised in excess of the budget
Right.
in totality comes back to CPC against the funding that we've encumbered for them.
Mhm.
And I do want to point out that Mayor Field, which we funded last year for 210, we voted this time last year, and their playground equipment is scheduled to arrive in 8 weeks.
Okay, you won me over.
All right. Oh, is there any other need to talk, or do we want to move forward to a vote? All right, let's move to a vote. We had a first, we had a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All against?
Madam Chairman, for the project, it's just for the amount of this money. I think it's just too much for our budget at this point in time. I'm for it, but I have to vote against the full 350.
The worthy dissent. I appreciate you. I do. Okay. And then does it make sense to talk about Girls Inc.? The other option too is to say there is no other project that we want to fund at this time, right? We sometimes roll over funding. So I just want to throw that out as another option. Last year we rolled over some funding. And also because we have a few projects that are coming back to us or coming back in after they've sort of expended their funds and came underneath. I do think that we're going to be moving some money ahead to next year anyway, even if we sort of, recommend funding for Girls Inc. tonight.
Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah,
of course. I mean, if we can afford Girls Inc., which it sounds like we potentially can, again, the numbers aren't going quickly in my head. And I'm on like too many hours of screen time. So now my eyes are just like blurry. Here are all blobs on the screen. I guess my thought is, the purpose of the building and the mission everyone agrees with, or not to be assuming, but it's very popular. And then the conversation about, I think it's a very interesting conversation about what does historic funds go to? And, it's to use a building that's already downtown that hasn't had that kind of use. Sorry, I believe my son's like toothbrush that makes noise. It's making laser sounds. Sorry, it's totally distracting me. That it might be, it's maybe worth doing just because I feel like this is going to be something that Holyoke comes up against a few more times with historic preservation, that, that it might be a little bit different, and it might be a good kind of like put it forward and then see what the response is. But if, if we can't do any historic preservation unless it is, each one is like $20 million because you've gone back to the original warehouse from the 1840s, that might make historic preservation harder here. And that might be something that the state needs to hear about, that perfect becomes the enemy of good. I'm not quite sure, but it seems like it might be since it's a worthwhile project to get it started. Especially because it sounds like without doing that, it will take a while for this, just to get sort of an advisory opinion from the state commission might take a while to get back. And then, that project doesn't get to go forward. Anyway,
I think my issue is similar to what you were naming earlier. It's because I don't love the building. Like in my mind, historic preservation is supposed to be because something is beautiful, right? Or like the train station is cool. Like architecturally, you're like, whoa, that was a neat idea that someone, built it and designed it in that way, right? So I think that's part of like what my hesitation was with that building. And I liked your point that like our historic buildings are like, it's going to be industrial history, I think what we're really funding is Girls Inc. We're funding the program. We like Girls Inc. Mm-hmm. It's not about the building, right? So there's that piece for me that, I really like Girls Inc. as an organization. And if we funded this building, For me, it wouldn't be because I wanted to save this building, which to me seems pretty unremarkable. You look through Holyoke and we have a million of these. You know, it's more about supporting the program, but also maybe also are, you know, preserving normal buildings, because that's just part of like the fabric of who we are as a city. It's like those really normal buildings that have sort of been shifted and changed and built up over time. Like you said, I thought your point was great, Helene. Israel, you wanted to speak? Your hand's up.
Well, Mr. Falsetti had his hand up before I did. That's fine. He could go first, if anything.
Madam Chairman, what is our balance now that we have to spend?
So technically we have 130,901 and 5 cents. And that's if we don't use any of the funding that I know that we do have.
Well, then potentially we have enough money to cover the cost of Girls Inc.'s application, which is $150,000. All right.
Even just with the underages that Amy and I totaled before the meeting, we have $20,000.
If we have enough money to, I would like to, Izzy, you're after me, so I'll just say quickly, I'll vote for the Girls Incorporated if we have the $150,000 to pay for it. The need is there. It's a good it's a good organization. They do good work. We're going to bring a vacant building back to life for $150,000. It's well worth the money. I'd like to make that motion when at the proper time. But Izzy, go ahead.
I think I like the Girls Inc. org too. The only thing for me is I just want to make sure that we're consistent with what we do. It's consistency for me. I want to fund them 110%, but I want to make sure that we're going through the process that we do for anyone else that goes through historic preservation process. I understand that they're nonprofit. Okay, baby. Okay. I understand that they're a nonprofit organization that provides a lot of services. I have 2 daughters. My wife actually was a member at Girls Inc. and my mother-in-law worked there for a long time. I just want, for me, it's trying to be fair across the board. And that's the only thing that would hold me back, is just that historic preservation piece, trying to get that down. But I'm not against the project at all. There's just that one little consistency piece.
We'll have to go through the process, right? Like, so we recommend funding to city council. They likely move it to finance. Then it goes back to city council. Let's say they approve it. We then draft the PR with their legal representation, and it gets sent to Mass Historic, and we wait for feedback. We wait for comments. If it comes back that Mass Historic won't support it, then it's a moot project, and we just, you know, we put that into the terms and conditions of the contract that at that point the funding will not move forward. And it will take a little bit of time to draft it and then to send it and wait for feedback. So it's not a project that, because of that requirement, it will move slower. Okay, so Michael, sounds like you wanted to make a motion.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to fully fund the Girls Incorporated application for $150,000, provided we have the money in the budget.
Yes.
I'll
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
All right.
All right, any against? No, unanimous. It's always interesting when we go into a funding cycle, because sometimes I go in thinking, I have this really clear idea of how I think we're gonna vote. Doesn't always go like I expect. I feel really good about the projects that we've put forward though. And just so you know, we've been tracking, we have to spend 10% in each category, and we did track that to make sure that we were doing that. Because, for example, you can't put 90% of your money in one category, right? You have to put 10% into or more into each. And we did satisfy that. Okay. So the only thing that I have under other is just that, Amy, if you can reach out to the other applicants to tell them that we were unable to fund their projects at this time. And, you know, we can encourage them to reapply in a future funding round. And Oh, Mary, I see your hand up. You have a question about that or something else?
No, I want to add another other, so I'll wait till you're done, but I just thought I'd raise my hand in advance.
My only other, I think, is Louis Salazar, you met tonight from the Historic Commission. He is the videographer who is working on the project for us for CPC. And we had a conversation earlier this week where we outlined the applicants or the grant recipients he's going to start reaching out to. So he's going to start filming over the next 4 or 5 weeks. So it will be exciting this spring to start having some rough cuts and then some finalized videos to share with you all. So just wanted to share that. It's moving along, making some progress. Mary, do you want to bring up your point?
Yeah. Is there a way that we can ask if anybody wants all of the members to receive a letter or some information that they must get it in 24 hours in advance of the meeting? Can we insist on that? I mean, there were 2 moments tonight that were a little bit, I don't know, it's just kind of uncomfortable for us. One was the Parker thing. She said she sent a letter, but if she sent it and it got to us today, that's useless.
Yeah.
It's just, it sets them back. They had a whole month to get it in. So it's not like they didn't have a lot of time. And, the other thing was when the New England farm workers letter came through and they were saying, something about, didn't everybody know we sent a letter? And, that was previous to the last meeting. And I do know from the last meeting that there were people amongst us who had not seen that letter. So, that had corrected their figures. So is there a way that we can tell them that it must get to us 24 hours in advance of a meeting? And the other thing is, can we also have the information all in one place? Because even as they were speaking, I was here trying to thumb through my emails on another source. We shouldn't have to thumb through things. It should be all in one spot. So can we somehow figure out how to do those 2 things?
Yeah, Amy and I can talk more about that for sure. I think part of the issue is things come in a trickle effect, right? So, I would love to get us to a point where we can submit like the agenda with the minutes from the last meeting with anything, kind of like how city council has like a packet.
Yeah.
Like everything goes together at once. And I think we can try to do that to the best of our ability. And yeah, we can name it to folks that if you send stuff within a day, it just may not be able to be shared. But in this case, it was hard not to share it because it felt so timely to us voting that I was like, sure, I'll read it into the record. And also, I think we can do a better job at getting things out earlier so that you have more time to read them. Yeah, Michael?
Mary, I like your idea about the 24 hours, but I would make it 48 hours. Mm-hmm. For us to get it, to read it, to research articles or conditions or thoughts that they may be, and reflect upon it ourselves. I would actually make it, look, if you got something to tell us, you got 48 hours prior to the meeting. Then, Izzy's going to school, he's working full time, he's busy, we're all busy, but 48 hours is more than that. It ought to be 48 hours so we can read it, digest it, think it over, sleep on it, and then discuss.
We can do that in the future. I just want to state for the record that we didn't ask that of this applicant, and so it's not that they were not, we didn't expect them to do that. I didn't say like you must do it within a certain amount of time. I just said by the next meeting, please, you have the opportunity to join us or to send a letter.
Yeah,
so,
no, that's fine.
We can give that
that's a good idea. That's a very good idea.
I was gonna make the same comment too as well. I'm sorry, John. I saw you raising your hand. I got the email earlier, and I read through some of it quickly. But I was like, at City Council, we just filed an order where you have to have at least you have to let us know 48 hours of notification before it gets considered. Okay, baby, go ahead, John. You should call him.
I'm going to talk with everybody, but I think something. I would go either 3 or 4 days ahead of time Put down, by the way, business days, so they don't count weekends, because we have this challenge of planning board all the time too. Stuff comes to us like an hour before the meeting. And I think, to Megan's point, they didn't know that before, but maybe going forward, the next round, that's like right in the cover page of the application.
Yeah.
Any sort of subsequent material that's going to be supplied after this application must be received, by the group within, either 72 or 48, 72 or 96, wherever it is, business days before the meeting. That just gives people time. Everyone's got a busy schedule. And to Michael's point, time to read it, do any research you want. But, as they say, we're moving along, we're learning as we go.
Helene, do you want to have a final
Yeah,
word?
just one kind of little modification. I think that sounds good, and I'm a little busy in myself. I guess just to be clear that if that information is available, because just from tonight, I know that Carrie had been in just like this ping pong of trying to get this information and trying to get what estimate, like, could I get a range, and that it was sort of that lack of being able to do that, then talking to the designer to say, this is the so I don't want people to feel like if they get information, between that deadline and the time, and it's reasonable that they couldn't raise something. But, if it's information where it's like, oh, 2 weeks ago, I found out about this, and, now I'm telling you about it the day before that. So just to kind of like, if the information is available, which, in my kind of legal practice, that's kind of standard to have as a requirement, that I have to provide evidence that I have. But if I don't get it, until the day before, it doesn't mean that I just, it disappears and is irrelevant. So.
Thank you. I want to say congratulations to John and Maribel and Helene and Francesca, who made it through your first funding round.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yay.
Easy spending other people's money.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a good hobby.
It feels good to shop with somebody else's money. I like it.
Yeah. It really feels good to be able to support these causes, these requests. It really is. Yeah.
The contract subcommittee will meet, and I think at this point, did we officially vote? I'm going to just second guess myself for a second. Did we officially vote to approve the terms and conditions?
Oh, let me go back.
Or did we blow through that and we didn't?
No, we voted. I think we did.
Yeah.
For the 4.
We did vote?
For the 4.
I'll tell you in a few minutes.
I'm just making sure.
Earlier in the meeting, we voted.
I'm going to leave this meeting and then I'm going to realize we didn't, and then we can't draft contracts. So what I would like though is we would like to use the terms and conditions, thank you, that we've now created as those boilerplates to just be able to move forward with the next contracts. The only piece I heard that we need to include is the funding piece for the Miracle League playground. That if they do end up funding more than what they need in the total budget, that it will return to the CPC as an offset. Other than that, we're going to be using the same ones that you've already approved so that we can start drafting contracts. Okay, seeing nodding heads. Let's talk about when our next CPC meeting is. So April. Okay, so April 13th is the second Wednesday. Does that work for folks? At 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, what was that date?
The 13th.
I'll probably be on a little later like I did today because I work on Wednesdays and I don't really know at what time I come out sometimes. So
sure.
But I'll be on.
Well, as soon as you can join us.
Yeah.
All right, Mary, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to go back, but in regards to what you said about contract language for the Miracle League, I think we need to put a limit on it, because if you say that any extra has to come back to us, that de-incentivizes, getting the extra money. I'm sure, continuing to fundraise. So say they got, $100,000. How much do they have to give us back? And certainly they can find a way to use it. Even though there's better and more equipment, maybe they can pay for more of the labor. So I'm not sure. I think we need to put a limit on how much you want them to return in that contract, unless I don't understand what you were saying about the contract language.
No, you're not wrong.
Probably need a date also, because it can't go on, perpetually. They're fundraising.
Yeah, so
Right.
it could be like as of a
Yeah.
certain date.
So those like tidbits would be what the contract committee has to work out. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to work on that and then bring it back to you in the April meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Really good meeting, everyone. Thank you so much.
Madam
Okay.
Chairman, it's
Oh,
April.
we need to officially adjourn the meeting. Sorry.
Second.
There we go.
Bye,
starting my
everybody.
daughter
Have a good
going
night.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.